at allpointstv.com, and we're glad to see all of you out there. And we hope you'll stay tuned for the next hour. And we're going to try to say a few things here that will pique your interest, and hope you will learn something in the process. We're going to do a program here today a little bit away from what we had what we had first of all intended, and that is changed because of the passing of a giant here in the city of Flint. And that giant is Councilman Eric Mays. And I have decided that I'm going to dedicate this program to the memory of Eric Mays, because Eric Mays is just like any other figure who's making a giant contribution ahead of a lot of persons of his time, that the dimensions of the person is not to be understood during the time period in which he lived. And soon after that, it takes a little bit of time to take in all of the things that were going on that had him standing so far above so many of the others that it's hard to quantify just how high a level of a contribution he made. But I can tell you that this was a man that was committed to the residents of the city of Flint. And whatever was being said in the public glare, behind the scenes, that people were saying that he will call you back. If you have a concern, he's going to make sure that he's working on trying to resolve whatever the problem is. And he did that with all of the people that he had contact with. And it wasn't just the ones in his district and the ones he represented as a member of the city council of the city of Flint. It's the controversial figures that make the greatest contribution. And they're not hurrah so much when they're alive, but when they pass. And their record now is a record that is etched in history. We can go back over with a more fine-tuned comb and comb through the things that they did and make a more objective assessment of what they actually contributed to the quality of life in the community in which they lived, and also the wider community in which they didn't live, but they had an impact because of the tumbling effects of what they do, and so many lives that are changed by it. And they do things in the places where they go and make their contribution, and they're doing it because of the foundation laid by those who went before them. Those are the figures that will be remembered. And Eric Mays is one of those figures who will be remembered because he made a definite impression in the city. And my own memories of him would be one of being taken out of council meetings because he was objecting to some of the things that were going on and raising questions, because not only was he speaking truth to power, he was in power and speaking truth. And that's very and that's very rare. A lot of persons they say speak truth to power. Yeah, all of them outside. Yeah, what we need is more people like Eric Mays, who speaks truth to power once he gets in power himself and is sharing the power that he's speaking about. And he was one of those rare personalities in politics that would do that. And a lot of people, not the ones necessarily in the limelight, not the ones in the political arena, but a lot of people behind the scenes had a lot of respect for this man. And I certainly had a lot of respect for him, because I would watch his efforts and be guided by a lot of things that he did, and would be quietly applauding it, because I know he was on the right track of bringing about quality change for people who didn't have a voice, and those that were voiceless. Eric Mays was their voice, and they knew, as long as he's on that city council, they knew that their voice would be heard by at least one member of the council, and that person above all the others. Not saying the other councilman person would not listen to their constituents, but Eric Mays stood head and shoulders among those that were on that body, and everyone in the city of Flint knew it. They knew that he would stand up and be counted. And it didn't matter how many persons were on the other side. Those are the kind of leaders you want. You couldn't, if you were taking a contest on popularity of who was the most popular member of the city council. Let's see, maybe Eric would have gotten a couple of votes. Maybe I know he would have gotten his own vote. I don't know how many other votes he would have gotten, but he wasn't about that. Eric Mays was a man of conviction, and he held some strong views, and he was not one of those persons that was sitting in that chair ready to bow down or kowtow to anybody or to make deals with anybody if he felt that the deals being made were wrong. It was not right for his constituents. Then Eric Mays was not about that. The man was a man of principle, and you have to give him that, because that to stand up like he did takes an awesome amount of courage, and it's a commitment you can tell that was there because it had gone on for so long. Even before he joined the council, he was down there at the council making sure that they knew his voice was out here. And it took him a long time before he actually ran for the council seat, but he was down there downtown trying to stand in front of power to say that this ought to happen and that ought to happen. And he was doing it. I didn't think he was going to run for office, quite frankly, because when you're that strong in pointing out what people in power are doing, you don't normally think of them going into that place at some point and joining in the power structure. But I'm glad he did, because he made a contribution on the outside and he stayed true to what he was saying when he went inside. And that is phenomenal, because a lot of them, I'm going to mention some of them here on the national level, a lot of them were on the outside. And of course, everybody on the outside have a bone to pick because they're not willing power. But it's something else to get into power and then have drawn the same conclusions and have the same objections once you get inside the door. How many times have you seen that happen? And with Eric, you could count on it. He was a very consistent figure downtown, and everyone downtown knew he was there. Now, I don't think everyone that is making these public comments about how great he was and what kind of contribution he made, I don't think all of that is sincere. You say these things because you're a public figure, but Eric Mays was a thorn in a lot of their sides, and they fought Eric Mays, but he was unfazed by it. I can tell you that many persons would have been more relenting under that attack this man was under. This man was unrelenting, and I salute him and I celebrate him, because he's a rare product, that rare individual that comes along every once in a while in few of our lifetimes. And he etches a mold, he carves out a position of where he stood that stands in stone forever and is remembered because of that. When I think of Eric Mays, I think of Eric in the same way, and I think about some of the other figures that were vilified for the stands they took. I think in terms of Paul Robeson, and that might seem to be a stretch because Paul Robeson was this mammoth national figure, but on the local level, when I want to compare with anyone on the local scene, I don't think that there's a person I can think of that I put in the same place with him. I have to go to the national arena to find someone that can feel the space that he felt when he was here. And I think of Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was the one that was vilified and all the rest. And he wrote a book, and Robeson's book was called Here I Stand. And when I think about Eric Mays, I think about that because you You didn't have to send him a telegram. I know they say telegrams out now. You have internet. You have all these different networks. You're communicating with people. I don't even know what a telegram is today. But you didn't have to send him in the day a telegram to find out where he stood and who he was, because where he stood, he kept standing there, and he did not move because there was a lot of opposition saying that he should be more. What is the word here? I think the word is condescending.
Compliant,
but
though.
yeah,
They always want,
yeah, that's
they
the
always
word.
want to be more compliant.
Compliant.
He wouldn't do that.
That's right. They wanted to be more compliant. They wanted him to compromise a lot more, and that was just not what this man stood for. When they have, I'm not sure what the particulars are now in place for Eric. I'm not sure when they're going to have the funeral services for him. I will be finding it out sometime. Hopefully, I'll find it out today. Hope it maybe I don't know if the plans even it was so southern because I saw him. I saw him about a month ago, and the picture they had on TV yesterday as they were announcing the transition he had made. That picture they had on TV yesterday that showed him. I don't know when it was taken, but that looked a lot like the person I saw a month ago when I saw him at one of the restaurants here. We acknowledged each other's presence. I knew him, he knew me, and I knew him. And I think he had he knew that I had a lot of respect for him. We had met a number of times and had a few conversations. We didn't have to agree. What we had to do was to understand the position of the person. And I respected his position. I knew that everything he told me was said in sincerity. This man was not about trying to tickle your ear. And I knew anything he told me I could trust because he was a person that had tremendous character. No matter what they say about him today, now that he's made the transition, this man was a man of tremendous character.
He was always Eric. I mean, that's one thing I could always. I mean, I've met him back when we first started opening the studio, working with the studio, and basically he was consistent. I mean, you could depend on what he was going to, pretty much depend on what he's going to do. He was going to, if he had a position, he wasn't going to give in. He was, I mean, he was like, and I know his family I know his father was a pastor here in Flint, wasn't it? Or
yeah, that's right, John. I know that the family very well. Now, one thing about a family is that you can find all shades of in a family. There's vanilla, there's chocolate, there's different strawberry. There are different flavors in every household, and so Eric stood out among a lot of persons that stand out in this family. It is an outstanding family. I know one of the persons from the fact that they worked on they were the football coach out there where I worked, and I was invited to speak at a program where his sister was one of the persons that was the head of this organization. I spoke there, and we developed a relationship. I knew his mother viscerally through some connections, and she would sometimes laugh because she knew that she had a maverick in her son, but I could tell there was a great amount of appreciation behind it because all of her children were different, but Eric was the one that stood out as the maverick of the family, and I think he knew that, and I think that they appreciated that. In the family, you have that, and he stood out in that family. Has made that family proud, and has made this city proud. Did not make everybody like him, but that's part of the position and persona he left behind, because anybody that is really, let's be honest here, anybody that is applauded by everybody means a person didn't do anything, because you're not going to have friends in every domain, every dimension. There's going to be somebody who doesn't like what you're doing, and you might as well quit it right now, trying to be all things to all people at all times, because that's not what's going to make you memorialized and is not going to make your commitment remembered once you're gone. Eric Mays is not going to be forgotten. And he won't be forgotten because what he did for so many people, they're going to remember that because they can remember when they had some problems and they called to see if there was anything could be done. And if there was anything that could be done, Eric Mays was going to stay with you until he got that done that could be done. And he was not going to say he couldn't do anything. One thing that I kept hearing over and over again, I didn't live in this district when I was living in the city of Flint. But one thing I kept hearing about Eric is that if you called him up and you told him about some problem you had, one thing you could count on, if he told you he's going to call you back, you could believe that that man was going to call you back. It may be late at night because of all the things that went on during the course of the man's day. He was a very busy person and answering a lot of persons in different districts were calling him up because they knew that if the other persons that they were calling would not take up their calls, they knew Eric would take it up. Eric Mays would take it up.
That was like consistent. I mean, I have talked to so many people over the course of the time that I've done this, worked here at the studio.
Mhm.
A lot of people would say that, you know, they had issues with Eric and stuff like that. But the bulk of the people I talked to said, I had my city council person, the mayor, wouldn't respond to my calls. I called Eric within that day. I got a call back. He was on board. He got things going for me. And I wasn't even in his ward. So, I mean, that's a mark of a true, public servant.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing that he has his legacy on that.
John, you couldn't say it any better than that because the true value of a leader is that if he's leading someone that cannot do anything for him in return, but he's not doing it because of that. He's doing it because it's the right thing to do. And because he cares about the quality of other people's lives other than his own. And he's a servant. That's what he was. He was a servant of the people of the city of Flint. And he didn't see himself cubbyholed into just one particular corridor of power, political power. This man saw himself as a person to make the city better.
You see, he was.
And you have to give him credit for that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying to say. The thing I've overwhelmingly comes to me is that I've talked to other people who were on the other side of the aisle, so to speak, on a larger scale. And Eric was never a person to hold that against them. He was willing to work with them. The Republicans I'm talking about, because they're not existent largely in the city of Flint. But I mean, he was willing to talk to people on the state level who are Republicans, and he was able to work with them. And that's remarkable because it was so heavily partisan here. I mean, so heavily partisan here.
I'll tell you what one group, John, I won't call a name out, but I'll tell you what one group said. Sometimes we'll meet for breakfast with this one group, and we would talk about Eric Mays, and somebody would say, well, he's down there raising a lot of sand on the council, and some people would say, yeah, but what he's objecting to is that a lot of them are down there, some of them are down there, and they are not necessarily handling the funds properly, and that's what Eric Mays is raising the objection to. This man was not anybody's pocket, and we're not paying him any money to make a vote this way or vote another way. This man was a man that was serious about doing the thing that he came there to do, was voted to do, the thing he campaigned upon to do. And once he got in there, he did it. And I will never, ever forget the role this man played, because I know that the quality of life in Flint is better because he passed his way. There's no question about that. And I'm going to dedicate this program. This is a Black History Month. We haven't done a lot of programs on Black history, been doing a lot of things on other matters. We've given all the things that happen in the country, tearing the quality of life down on a national level. So I've been dealing with that. But I'm going to do a Black History program today in the name of Eric Mays, because I want to put him on the shoulders of a lot of things that went on before him, and not that he was just doing this for any particular segment of the population. Eric was trying to improve the city of Flint. This man was very much meticulously about the business of making the quality of life better. And I'm going to put him in this genre because this is the Black History Month, and since I want to do a program before the month was over on this topic, I'm going to dedicate this program to Eric Mays. And Eric, I know that you are at peace and you have made your mark. You've etched your name in the record of the city of Flint and Genesee County. And everyone in the city is stunned by the loss and feel the loss, even those that disagree with you.
He's going to be very
You will be remembered.
Anybody who wants to go in his take over his seat in the ward is going to have big shoes to follow. I mean, it's going to be nearly impossibility for them to adequately represent that population.
Yeah, that's
like
a point made.
I mean, it's going to be awfully hard for them to do that.
Yeah, that's a point. That's a point made. Now the issue is the replacement, and that won't be the easiest thing to do, because there's going to be a contrast and a comparison between the successor and the one that person is succeeding, and that comparison is inevitable because of the large image that this man represented and still represents even today. They're going to remember Eric Mays, and they're going to remember the leadership that he gave and judge all the ones coming behind him, and the ones that stood beside him on the council will be judged by it. Really, all the people in power in the city and county, and that's going to be a very interesting development to watch how they stack up in the future in that position, because that role is going to be very hard to fill. I'm not saying it cannot be filled, but I can tell you that those are some large shoes that the next person will be walking into in that position.
You mentioned Paul Robeson, and I'd like to, wish we'd have sat down with Eric and somebody and actually said, who do you think you're influenced by? Who do you like to emulate? Because I mean, I can definitely see parallels, from what you've already brought up. Yeah, I can see parallels because they're both they're unswayed, they're uncowed, and they would both stand up and they would walk into the pits of hell and not change their way because they're not going to back down. And that's the way what Eric was. I mean, how many times was he pulled out of there and escorted by the police? And but I mean, it's like the thing is, you got to have people willing to take that risk. I mean, some people rolled their eyes when they saw that happening, but you got to have somebody who was willing to do that for the city of Flint, not just his own constituents.
That's right.
But I mean, I had even when it was happening, I'm like, okay, he's getting arrested again. But how many people are willing to put himself out there like that? He was willing to do that.
They wanted him to shut up downtown. He was not going to shut up downtown or anywhere else. Eric was a true believer. John, I think that's what you're saying. I think what you're saying here is that he was a true believer in the First Amendment, the right to have your own voice. And he insisted on that. And he didn't have to go and read the First Amendment in order to practice it. He was a practitioner of it. And those who were trying to silence his voice, when that happened, it took him going out of the council meetings in handcuffs, because that was not going to happen. And we've lost something here, because you don't have an Eric Mays in your leadership. There are not that many that come along in your lifetime. And when they do, then you need to acknowledge that. Hopefully you'll give them the flowers while they're here, but certainly in the aftermath of it, they should be acknowledged when they're not here, because their record now is mold in a mold, and there's no question about it at this point, because there's nothing else to be said and made by them about what it was that they did. This man was a giant, and he did some things that had never been done before. We've had city councilmen down there. Floyd McCree broke the ice here in this city in terms of council, high level of council representation, becoming the first Black mayor in the city, et cetera, et cetera. And that mold was broken, and you wonder what's going to happen, who's going to fill the shoes then to continue that thrust toward the kind of things that happen to make the city better. And Eric Mays will come to mind and will be remembered forever in this city for what he did during his time in the halls of power, and before that even, the things that he did and the things he stood up for which were many times unpopular, but they were the right things to do. And I wish I had asked him, John. I never did. I never thought about asking him, but I certainly was curious about it. And I did wonder about it sometime. I just wish I had broached the issue with him. Where did he get his inspiration? And what models would he say that he was following, that they were those figures that had influenced his strength? Because we all have somebody in our background that we can point to that was an inspiration in our lives. And that's one of the regrets I have, that I didn't ask him at some point that what was fueling that passion that he had. And that would be a question I will always regret that I never had a chance to ask him, because I always wondered, when I see a person standing up resolutely on a principle and not bending and not yielding, and that was him 7 days a week. You're not gonna give this man the money under the table, and he's gonna start singing a little bit different song. How do you sing the Lord's song in a strange land? He wasn't doing that. And I always wondered what kind of background and who were the influences in his background that would cause him to be that resolute. Because I can tell you that's very rare. I've been here a lot of years on this planet, and I don't meet that very often. And when I do, I know that I'm looking at something great and something rare. And he was both rare and he was very great. And he stood on the things he believed in. And you didn't have to write him a letter to find out what those things were. He did it every day. And he didn't care. I didn't see any evidence that he cared about those that thought he was wrong. He thought he was right. And that was enough fodder for him to fuel on his fire, to keep his flame lit, and kept him going back for more. And he had an inexhaustible amount of energy to pull from, because I never saw him down. I never saw him thinking about, what's me? This is too hard. I'm getting too much opposition, and I need to quit and get some friends around here. I never thought that he was into that frame of thought. He was always about the business of standing up, even if he had to stand alone in everything every position he was taking. This man I never saw him making alliances that he would have been ashamed of later. And I didn't see a lot of alliances that he made. He was standing up sometimes by himself. Some people were kind of in agreement with him, but they were not going to say the things in public he was saying.
He had a spine he had a spine made of titanium. I'm serious. The guy, you couldn't. Thing is, you really couldn't embarrass Eric, because you really couldn't embarrass, because he knew what he wanted. He knew what he was trying to get across, and he wasn't going to back down. He wasn't. I mean, there are times I'm not gonna lie about it. I cringe, like, oh my, this is ridiculous.
Yeah,
but then when you look back, you just like, he put himself out there.
Yeah, John, most persons had that response to Eric. There goes Eric again. But that's the kind of person that he was. And although you might have some criticism of his technique, the method and the means may not have been congruent in the minds of those who were watching what he was doing. But this man was result oriented. And a lot of persons would say things about the methods that he used, but this man was guided toward, and he was determined to get to the end result, which was a resolving of the problems he was trying to resolve on behalf of his constituents and others who called him to help them through the crisis that they had. And he was always available to them. You won't find one person that in the city of Flint that will say they called Eric Mays up and they presented a problem to him, and his answer was no. Even if he could not do anything about it, you could count on him taking the problem, going out and trying to see what he could do about it, and getting back with you later on. Mainly within that day, they said one thing everyone was saying was that this man will call you back.
I think I remember hearing this too, and I've seen it. He was without a vehicle for a while. I don't know what the whole reason behind it, but he actually got paid people to pick him up and drop him off. If he couldn't drive himself, he actually had people drop him off and pick him up. I mean, that he went through great measures to make sure that he could be there for his people. I mean, for the cities. I really think he might not like the person so much, but he would listen to him and I think he'll do his best to represent him. I mean, I've seen that. I mean, I've seen that 2 or 3 times on an individual basis.
Mhm.
You know, so I mean, like I said, he's a mixed bag. He was a mixed bag of a. He's a seriously flawed individual in some ways, but like that makes him more. I think that makes him more like likable in some ways. You know.
Yeah, John, I saw him at a restaurant, and I that was there was no indication. This is about a month ago, and there was no indication that there was any health issues. I don't. I'm still waiting for the report of what health problems he might have had. But I saw him, and we nodded and acknowledged each other's presence. And I just wish I had taken a little bit of time. You never know, and just take things for granted. But I wish I had taken the time, even at that point, about a month ago, and just simply, we were in the same restaurant. He was by himself. I was with my wife, and I wish I had. If I had been by myself, I think we would have probably sat down and had lunch together. But that was not to be. But he didn't. But he didn't. He was Eric Mays that I always saw. Walking with a certain step. He was, walking with power. The man walked like he was in charge of his space. He just had a certain persona about him that said he was comfortable in his own skin. And how often do you see that being the case? But there's no reason to believe that he was having any health problems. That's why I'm interested in finding out what was the point of what was the point of his departure. What caused it? Because he wasn't heavy set and always seemed to have taken care of himself. And he just didn't seem to have. I never saw him bend over anything like that. Always walking with a certain gait. So it was very shocking to hear that he had passed yesterday. That's when I heard it, and I didn't believe it. I went to the TV set. I was called to say, somebody said that they just now announced that Eric Mays had passed, and I said, I thought it had been misheard. I went to the TV set to find out for myself if that was the case. They had a pause in commercial and came back to it, and that's when the news was again repeated. Sometimes the news is so horrifying and so horrific and shocking that you have to have it repeated because the idea that all of us are mortal, but just the stature of some people is just startling when they announce that they're no longer with us. But I would tell you that we lost something great in Eric Mays. I'm going to dedicate this program to him and say a few things about some of the giants whose shoulders he was standing on and the things that he did. And I'm going to start this off way back when and read from some of the books in this dedication to Eric Mays and make this a Black History program in Eric Mays' name. So I'm killing two birds with one stone, something I should have done ahead of time at the beginning of the month to observe Black History Month. But I'm going to combine that with this sad news that I received yesterday, and I'm still accumulating some of the information about it. Let me start with a book written by Michael Conniff, and the spelling of that name is Conniff, and it's written along with Thomas Davis, Thomas J. Davis. And I'm going to read from page 10 of the book. And then I brought a whole host of other books here. Hopefully I can get to at least something about each one of them. Let me read on page 10 of this book. And I want to read this part to you. It says, and I need my specs, so I'm going to make sure that I don't miss anything in the text. So I'll use my specs here. And this is about the ancient Egyptian civilization. And I'll start here in the book called Africans in the Americas. And on page 10, it reads In modern times, scholars often underestimated the contribution of ancient Egypt to European civilization. More than 2 millennia ago, when the Ptolemaic Greeks came to rule Egypt, they extensively adopted and interpreted Egyptian spiritual, material, political, aesthetic, and intellectual systems. Although later Greek authorities freely acknowledged their cultural debt to Egypt. During the 19th century, many European writers, limited by their ethnocentric outlook and their racism, decided that Black Africa could have had nothing to do with Europe's rise to greatness. Some treated Egypt as Middle Eastern and divorced it from the rest of the African continent, wherein others went further, asserting the preeminence of Northern Aryan sources of Greek civilization to the virtual exclusion of Semitic, African, and Egyptian influences. So on going even back in that time period, I think the shoulders of Eric may stand there. Let me read page 50 of this book. This is the book written by the great historian Arthur Toynbee, and everyone who studies history, world history, will study Toynbee's writings. This book is called A Study of History by Arnold Toynbee, and I'll read from page 50 of this book. And this is the astonishing things that Arnold Toynbee said, stunning because of the stature of his scholarship. For him to make the claims that he made is really astounding when you understand what the facts are and then what the claims are being made here. He says, acknowledges classifying white men in accordance with their physical types, long heads and round heads, fair skins and dark skins, and all the rest of it, have sorted out three main white races, which they call Nordic, Alpine, and Mediterranean. For what it's worth, we will reckon up the number of civilizations to which each of these races have made a positive contribution. The Nordics have contributed to 4, possibly 5. The Indic, the Hellenic, the Western, the Russian Orthodox Christian, and possibly the Hittite. The Alpines have contributed to 7, possibly 9. The Sumeric, the Hittite, the Hellenic, the Western, both the Russian offshoot and the main body of the Orthodox Christian, the Aaronic, and possibly the Egyptiac and the Minoan. The Mediterraneans have contributed to 10. The Egyptiac, the Sumeric, the Minoan, the Syriac, the Hellenic, the Western, the main body of the Orthodox Christian, and the Aaronic, the Arabic, and the Babylonic. Of the other divisions of the human race, the brown, meaning thereby the Dravidian peoples of India and the Malayas in Indonesia, have contributed to 2. The Indic and the Hindu were their contributions. The yellow race have contributed to 3. The Sinic and both the Far Eastern civilizations, mainly the main body in China, and the Japanese offshoot. The red race of America are, of course, the sole contributors to the 4 American civilizations. The black races alone have not contributed positively to any civilization as yet. And that is the great Arnold Toynbee, the historian, who would make that type of a statement. But it shows you the level of denial that was in place here, through which Black History Month would have been created by the great founder of the month, Carter G. Woodson, Carter Godwin Woodson, who felt he had responded to this kind of scholastic denial, and did so in 1926 when he started off what was really controversial at that time. He even talked about it in terms of what he called it Negro History Week. And even that was laughed about because persons were so brainwashed, they were asking the question, how can you in fact cover that for even a week's time, with the claims being made by scholars on the level of Toynbee and others that were denying that was in his history to be studied. And that was not only a problem inside of the university like Columbia and some of the other top-notch universities. There was also a problem at Howard University. So when you had these scholars like the uncle of of the person that wrote Raising the Sun, Lorraine Hansberry, her uncle was a scholar at Howard University, and he was interested in bringing a course in history at Howard University. Howard is a premier university in Washington, D.C., named after O. Oliver Howard, who was a general in the Civil War. And because of the idea that we're now going to bring these blacks into the educational arena, and schools had to be set up for that purpose, of course. And so Howard University was one of those schools on the higher level, still there to be gone to today. And the Hansberry, Leo Hansberry was one of the scholars there in the 1920s. He tried to get a class going, and didn't have nobody wanted. It wasn't a popular thing to do. The fellow staff members were laughing at him behind his back, but his scholarship was such, and his research was such. I have two of his books from his papers, and his scholarship was such that after a while the laughing stopped, as it did for Carter G. Woodson. The laughing stopped because by the sheer weight of their scholarship, they were able to push back on this narrative that there was no contribution to be made. But you had to take into consideration the gratuity of the denial because of the gravity that was caused by the scholarship of those making those outrageous claims. We know the claims are outrageous today, but back in 1926, those challenges had to be made. You know, there's a scholar named Arthur Weigel. Weigel was another scholar, and one of the he doesn't mention the name of the scholar that called him, the black scholar that called him, but the voice was such, it was such a cultured voice, according to his own writing about it, that the person called him up and said he wanted to meet with Arthur Weigel. Arthur Weigel was another one of those denials. And when the person called him and said they wanted to meet with him, Weigel did not know he was talking to a black person, but he admitted that he agreed to the meeting and invited him to come to his home and so on and so forth. And so when the maid went to the door and opened it for the guest to arrive, it was now he didn't mention who it was. I can figure out who it was by the things that he said about him. It wasn't Carter G. Woodson. It wasn't W.E.B. Du Bois. These were scholars. Du Bois was a scholar from Harvard University, the first black to get a PhD degree from Harvard University, and the one that set up the history studies at that school. That series they have right now in publication from their history series started with W.B. Du Bois. But it wasn't Du Bois, because what Weigel said is that his maid went to the door and announced the guest had arrived, and he said he walked in the room, and to his astonishment, there was the person standing in front of him that introduced himself as the person that had called him, and he said the person was perfectly black. And so, who would that have been given that description? And I have concluded that was Hansberry that was the person that was there. And I can tell by Hansberry's writings that was he was that person. But he was perfectly surprised that voice that he attributed to a cultured person, he did not attach it to a black person. And they had a conversation about it, and it stimulated a book that that Weigel wrote. And in the book about it was a book called Antiquity, a book on antiquity. And one of the chapters in the book was on Akhenaten. And Weigel titled that chapter "The Nigger King," the Nigger King, because that was undeniable that Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV, as he was also known as before he changed his name because he changed his religion, and so the one that's known as Akhenaten, or known to me, I would call him Amenhotep, because he would have been Amenhotep IV in the 18th dynasty in Egypt. And that was the chapter he called, because that could not be denied, because his mother was from Sudan and his father was from, who was Amenhotep III, or Amenhotep the Great, was from Upper Egypt. And Upper Egypt would be the southern part of Egypt, because up and down is determined by the flow of the Nile River. And since rivers flow downhill and it's flowing to the Mediterranean, the only sea, by the way, that touches 3 continents, the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile River flows into the Mediterranean Sea, picking up water along the way from different arteries, starting with Lake Victoria, as they call it, because the English are in the colonizing parts of Europe. So Lake Victoria, as they would call it, but I would call it by its more ancient name, the Nwanza Nyanza, which would be another name for the same river, but colonials will impose their name on it, and now some would call it Lake Victoria, but starting there and then flowing 4,100 miles north. So if the river's flowing north, that means then, according to that river's flow, then north would be down and up would be the origination of the river, starting around the area of Uganda, Tanzania, and I said Uganda, Tanzania, and let's see, what's the other one? Ethiopia. So that would be and then the Nile River uniting in Khartoum, where you have the Blue Nile and the White Nile meeting, and then forming a single Nile, and then flowing the rest of the way through Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea. So the point I'm making here is that we know the origination of Akhenaten, because we know his mother and her origination point, and the people there. We also know the father was from upper or southern Egypt, and we know who are the persons that are there. So they could not deny Akhenaten being being a Black person. So he writes that book, and he pulls them out of all the other kings that they've had and said this is the one that would be different. But then his mother was different then, and his daddy was different, and so were the others of that dynasty, because we're talking about a dynasty that also had in it Tutankhamun, King Tut, as they call him, the one that was founded in 1922 by Howard Carter. Okay, so I would put that in the arena of the shoulders. This man standing on some shoulders. He didn't know all of this, but that is beside the point. The point is that we're talking about a cascade effect of history, and history is affected by people even if they don't know it. You don't have to know the history to be affected by it. I mean, there are people that don't know about Rosa Parks, but they may not know they're standing on her shoulder. But I tell you one thing you cannot do is order them to the back of the bus. So that's a witness being made, even in the absence of their understanding of the role that they played. They are affected by it because that history is tumbled down to a new understanding because of their standing there. So that's more of an ancient part of it. Let me read something to you here from this book. This is page 208 of the book, 207, 208 of the book. This is one put out by Professor Gates at Harvard University. And Gates did a series in 2000 called Wonders of the African World. And it was a 6-part series that came on in 2000 on PBS. And that's got Gates now going around. Somebody told him he was a scholar in history. And so he is now going around trying to find everybody's roots and doing roots on Oprah, roots on this person, roots on that person, and going back and looking at all of that records of their family tree and tracing their family and putting it on TV. He's a scholar, but too much of a television scholar. Now he was he wrote a book that went along with the series called Wonders of the African World. This book is called Wonders of the African World. And I want to read to you page 207 and 208 of the book of a person he's talking about, whom I met in Ghana and sat down with her for lunch in Ghana. Her name was Dr. Akosha Purby. Akosha was born, her name means she was born on Wednesday. So Akosha Purby, this part of the family, she was born on Wednesday, and her name identifies that. So here's Gates talking about his discussion with Akosha Purby, a historian that when I was there in 2007 was teaching. I'm not sure if she's teaching now, but was teaching at the University of Ghana at Legrand. I don't know how that connects it with Accra because it's located in Accra, but it's considered to be the University of Ghana at Legrand. Here's what Gates wrote in that meeting with Akosha Purby. In Ghana, talking about West Africa, in Ghana, it is a breach of decorum to be too interested in slavery. After all, many Ghanaians are the descendants of slaves incorporated into family clans and might take offense if asked a lot of probing questions. A little bit embarrassed about it. But truth be told, slavery for most Ghanaians is not something in which they feel implicated. It is mostly a concern of Americans. Dr. Purby, while entirely sympathetic with my concerns, cautioned me to remember that to Africans, slavery was not about race. And I have to pause here and say this real quickly. Nor is it about race here. This is a mistake that many of these nations have made. They think that the race problem is about race. Yesterday, Farrakhan gave his last speech, public speech, at this point, as he pretty much announced his standing down because he's got health problems, and so he had gave his last message yesterday. Farrakhan made a contribution, but his whole experience is built around a certain racial view. And he saw it as a racial issue. And I want to temper that with what is being said here, because if you go into Africa, you'll find it to be looked at in a different lens. They don't accept this term either, that blacks are African Americans. That claim can be made here. It's not made over there. But it says here, which they feel implicated, it is mostly a concern of Americans. Americans are more situated around notions of race. We are obsessed with it in this country. There's an obsession with race in this country. Dr. Purby, while entirely sympathetic with my concerns, cautioned me to remember that to Africans, slavery was slavery was not about race, but about power and money. Do you think it's different? It's about something different here? People think that race is about race. What sense would that make? That race is about race, which means then that the objection is to a group because they have a certain complexion of skin. If you believe that, you know, you, you cannot be a sane person and believe that. To attach any significance to the color of somebody's skin. And that's what Martin was talking about in Washington on the second march to Washington, when Martin said he wanted his daughters not to be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So people think that it's about color. It's not about color. That's what I was trying to say at this church program yesterday. I know they didn't follow everything I was trying to say, but that's why I have to bring these books. Racism is not about race. Racism is about power and money. Those Africans, going back to the text here and reading, those Africans who were rich and powerful enough to get involved in the slave trade did so. In their view, at least on an equal basis with the Europeans. I'm going to show you a picture of that in just a minute to demonstrate that. Forts, slave forts such as Elmina, I was in that council, I've been there, were built on land leased to European powers by powerful African rulers. And in these parts, the African continent power belonged to the Ashanti. To know the origins of the slave trade, she advised me, meaning Purvis was talking to Gates, who's singing through the lens of race, and she's advising him and telling him that in these parts, the power belonged to the Ashanti. To know the origins of the slave trade, she advised me. Now she's advising this man. This man got a PhD degree. She's advising him. She's not having a conversation on an even plane with him. She's speaking from a level to him with a PhD, and she's advising him. Those are words he used. Those are not my words. Those are the words he used. To know the origins of the slave trade, she advised me quietly. One must know the Ashanti. And as far as they were concerned, she added, and Ashanti herself, they were not selling their brothers or sisters into slavery. Oh, okay, we're running out of time. Major point. They were selling strangers, foreigners, enemies, and captives. Listen to this point here, and we'll pick this up next week. As we get to the end of it, we'll just say a word as we close out. The concept of the Africans was invented by European colonials. Ask yourself, an African to whom? And I'll end it on that note there. We ran out of time, but I want you to know a little bit about that topic in this month, given the gravity of what the loss was with Eric Mays. And I put that information we gave out today in Eric's name. And Mr. Mays, sir, you were a champion here among men and women. And you made your mark. You made your distinct role known to those that knew you. And now you can rest. Okay, we are finished with the program today, and we hope you got something out of it. We'll be back next week. I'll finish this up next week when we have more time. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.